Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I'm your host Matthew Pejkovic and this is episode number 61. Well, it's been a while, a little over 6 months to be exact, since I last recorded and uploaded the podcast, and truth be told, I wasn't sure that I would do it again, but just like writing reviews, podcasts are something that I enjoy and it is something that I missed as well. It's fun talking about the movies with people that I like and respect in this industry and share those discussions with you, the audience. One of those people I like and respect and consider a friend is Simon Foster, who has, to my appreciation, guested on the podcast several times before and is a joy to talk to about all kinds of movie topics. Today's podcast, that discussion revolves around box office king going on 3 decades now, Tom Cruise, who of course has a new movie out this week, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. Simon and I talk about that film and Cruise's career as a whole, which, like him or hate him, you have to admit is pretty spectacular. So I look forward to sharing this discussion with you. But before we begin, I would just like to remind everyone who is listening to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast on iTunes to please review and rate the show. You can also find me on Twitter at Matt's Movie Rev, and you can also find me on Facebook, the link for which you can find on the website www.mattsmoviereviews.net. So without any more delay, here is the latest podcast. Enjoy. Joining me tonight is frequent guest and friend of the podcast, Mr. Simon Foster, film reviewer of ABC FM Statewide and the man behind the great website Screenspace. Simon, I thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Matthew, my friend, it is always good to talk to you. It's always good to talk movies with you, and it's particularly exciting to talk Tom Cruise with you. He is the biggest star of my generation, and I've always been a fan, despite some moments in his career that have garnered some ill feeling amongst his fans. I've been there 100%. I'm thrilled to chat with you about him.
I love the Cruiser as well. I've always liked him since I was a kid. I remember when I was young watching movies like Top Gun and Cocktail and all these other things, because my older brother was a big Cruise fan as well, so it's kind of like almost like he handed down the Cruise legacy down to me. But it's an interesting thing about him, like he's been for how many decades now, 3-4 decades going strong as the box office king. New movie coming out, or actually be out now in cinemas, the latest Mission Impossible, which is the 5th in the series, Rogue Nation, and we were both at a screening earlier this week. Let's just talk about our thoughts on the film. How about you go first?
All right, look, I've been a huge fan of the Mission Impossible series all along, barring, of course, number 2, the blue one, which I think we can all agree is a bit of an exception that proves the rule. With Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, I think Cruise does exactly what he does best, and that is be a big, charismatic, engaging movie star in a huge, wonderful piece of popcorn entertainment. What I really loved about Rogue Nation, and we can get into the details of the plot if you like a little bit later, but for me, it was a lean piece of Hollywood entertainment that knew exactly what it had to be, didn't overstate anything in there. There wasn't an overabundance of plot, and what was necessary was handled with real skill and real dexterity. And front and center was this really charismatic leading man who brings a great complexity to the Ethan Hunt character. Those who sort of bounce from one Mission Impossible film to the other and film to the next and just say that he's kind of doing the same sort of character again, I think they're not really paying attention, because this is a character that's developed with the series.
Yeah, it's very true, especially since the third film, because you're talking about the second one that was released, I think, back in 2000. There was a gap of around 6-7 years when that third film came out, the one that was essentially, it wasn't a rebuild, but it kind of felt like in terms of quality and in terms of how Cruise was kind of approached the role. And how we had the kind of structure of the people around him, like Simon Pegg is now a frequent person that's in the films now, and J.J. Abrams has stayed on as a producer. It is a certain quality about these last 3 films, and you could definitely see Ethan Hunt's character very evolved throughout all of them. In the third one, he was a man that began with a relationship, and now in the 5th one, he's very much a lone wolf again, bar his IMF comrade. So this 5th film pretty much the gist of it is the IMF has been dismantled thanks to a pesky CIA agent who I've got to say was played rather well by Alec Baldwin.
In the scenery, didn't he? He had a good time chewing the scenery, Alex.
I don't know anyone else who can steal steal scenes from Tom Cruise in a Mission Impossible film by just uttering dialogue. I mean, it's quite something. So IMF are dismantled, and as that happens, this mysterious villainous organization called the Syndicate, they strike. So it's up to Ethan Hunt and his other IMF comrades to get together and try to stop these people from taking over the world. That's pretty much the gist of the plot. But like you said, while the plot does drive things along, it's pretty much about Tom Cruise's charisma, the performance. And I got to say, I'm a big fan now of Christopher McQuarrie as a action director. Third film in, he did Jack Reacher, did The Way of the Gun before that, but he's really proven himself to be quite a deft hand in the genre.
Well, one of the great, I totally agree. I think one of the great things about Jack Reacher, which was obviously a film shot on slightly less budget than this Mission Impossible film, but even it looked wonderful in widescreen. He seems to be an old school director. He shot Rogue Nation on film, and that is one of the great assets of this fifth Mission Impossible movie. It is one of those beautiful-looking Hollywood blockbusters I've seen in a long time. It is crafted with such an exceptional level of skill, most exemplified in this extraordinary sequence in the middle of the film, set in a Viennese opera, to Turandot, or Turandot, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that, but it cuts back and forth between assassins zeroing in on a prime minister and Ethan Hunt's chase to stop all this shenanigans going on. And it is a beautiful bit of cinematography, of editing, of direction, and that, for me, that exemplifies the very best moments in the Mission Impossible series. This is a series that is obviously made with a lot of love for cinema and a lot of love for the tradition of cinema, but it's made with a lot of the most modern mod cons and gadgetry and stuff like that, and I think it works true. It's probably as close as Hollywood comes to creating sort of a James Bond type of character in Ethan Hunt, and I think it's every bit as good as that series. Yeah,
I agree with that, definitely. And like James Bond films, you have your Bond girls, and in Mission Impossible films, you have that element to it as well. But I got to say that Rebecca Ferguson, who in Rogue Nation plays a MI6 agent, who you don't know whether she's on Ethan Hunt's side or she's not. I'll leave that for the audience out there to make up their own mind while they watch the film. But she, I thought, was just terrific in the movie as well. She hasn't done much in regards to film work. She did star in the White Queen TV series, which was a BBC series. But I just actually loved her in this movie. What did you think of her?
Yeah, look, I agree. I think there's been some concern in the past that the female roles in some of the Mission Impossible films have been slightly underdeveloped. That was at its worst in number 2, with poor Tandy Newton having to carry a thankless role. And there's been some good moments for actresses in the Mission Impossible series, but I think Ferguson, who I'm the same as you, I knew very little of her. I knew she had a co-starring part in Hercules, of all things. But she has really emerged as a great foil for Cruise, every bit as strong and charismatic and engaging on screen as he is, and also is great in those action scenes. So I hope Hollywood takes advantage of this new discovery. She looks terrific, she moves wonderfully well, and she's got all the star power that her leading man has.
Yeah, definitely. I felt she really complemented Cruise while they were on the screen together, but she had enough going on though where she held her own as well when he wasn't.
It's interesting. What I also thought about this film is that it didn't pander to a younger sort of American summer blockbuster crowd. This is a film that, very much like its leading man, is aging, but aging gracefully, and is still very lean and mean, as Cruise has to be in certain moments in this film. And the fact that it is shot with such, rich colours, there's lots of dark browns, there's lots of sort of autumnal colours in this. It really does have this old school feel to it. Some of the final scenes around the alleyways of London, there's been some criticism that after the famous airplane stunt and the big car chase in Morocco, that the alleyway ending in London is sort of a little bit more downbeat than it needs to be, and I totally disagree. I thought it was perfectly in line with the rest of the film and was wonderfully thrilling.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. You mentioned before in regards to the quality of the Mission Impossible films, and that goes along with just the quality of Tom Cruise's films in general. Like, since Minority Report, he's just delivered one great action film after another. Edge of Tomorrow being last year's example of that. So, do you think is Tom Cruise's standing as an action hero? I personally, after watching him just really take on the position of action hero and really deliver quality films while doing so, I think he could be the greatest action hero of all time. What do you think?
Labeling him the best action hero of all time is a big call to make, because that puts him in the class of people like Bruce Lee and the like. Certainly, of the last 2 decades, his action films have been increasingly complex and interesting, and he, like he did in that period, sort of Jerry Maguire, and prior to that, he surrounded himself with lots of really strong directors, and we can talk more about that a bit later. He does manage to straddle that, is he an action hero, is he an actor in an action film type of series, and I think that's what makes his films most interesting. Plus, he doesn't just play the for want of a better word, the meathead action hero. His heroes are usually very complex. When you look at things like Edge of Tomorrow, the plotting is very complex. Even if you call something like Collateral or The Last Samurai an action film, they're still really sort of dense characters, multi-layered characters that also happen to engage in some pretty spectacular action scenes.
Yeah. See, my thing with it is that I remember around 4 or 5 years ago, I did a top 10 list of of who I think were the greatest action stars, and I had Tom Cruise at number 10. And what I think has happened, in my opinion, since then, is that the people I had above him, while they have been working over the last how many years it's been since I made that list, the quality of the films that they put out have been really bad compared to Tom Cruise's films.
Sure.
And I really put that into consideration because while you can talk about your Stallones and your Schwarzeneggers, Bruce Willis, for example, they as action stars, even though they have vehicles like their franchises and the Expendables movies and all that, the films themselves just haven't been that good. But when you put it up to like the Mission Impossible films and Edge of Tomorrow and say something like Oblivion, or the films that you mentioned before, Collateral, Last Samurai. To me, Cruise he's just slowly but steadily has risen to the top of the crop. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I absolutely do know what you mean. I think he's an actor who's, and as a personality, as someone who has to promote his films off screen, I was having this conversation with my wife last night. After doing films for nearly 4 decades now, he's still very, not only charismatic, but very enigmatic. You're never still quite sure who Tom Cruise is.
Yeah.
And that's for many people, that's a downside. For many people, they say, well, he's just not being honest with us. He doesn't come to these interviews and be himself. He's very sort of jaded and checkered in some of his responses. And, I mean, there's no bigger Tom Cruise fan than I am, and I still don't know, even after reading Andrew Morton's book and even after following his tabloid adventures for all these decades, it's still very hard to pinpoint exactly who he is. And I think that's sort of a throwback to old school Hollywood. We never really knew who Jimmy Stewart was or Humphrey Bogart was. We only ever knew these people by their movies. And I think Cruise has taken a leaf out of that book. He's remained a huge movie star because that's all he ever lets us see. Well,
one thing we do know about him is that he's a big thrill seeker. I mean, with these Mission Impossible movies, we now get the now infamous Tom Cruise stunt. I mean, that in Mission Impossible 2, he's like rock climbing at the start of the film without any kind of like safety line. In the 4th movie, he's like climbing up that Dubai Tower, and it's like, which is like the tallest tower in the world. And now in Rogue Nation, the guy's strapped himself to a bloody plane while he's going off. And he's got some type of special contact in his eyes, so his eyes stay open and no kind of like no dirt and what else goes in his eyes. And he just goes all out with these kind of things. And I look at this kind of stuff and I think, man, that's just great. But the question I pose to you is, these stunts of his, are they great entertainment value, or are they just a great marketing ploy to try to get people to watch these movies and see Tom Cruise almost kill himself?
There's certainly an appeal to that. I think they come first and foremost from the franchise desire to keep things real, keep things not only looking real but feeling real. That's probably why I react to the Mission Impossible series with such enthusiasm, because I get very little thrill from the CGI, the manufactured movies of the Transformers and the Avengers and all that sort of stuff, when the look and the feel of the film is like watching a video game. And I know that's sort of a generalisation, and that probably needs to be expanded on in a different podcast. But for these films, they have a look and a feel that is very realistic, which adds to the thrill. You know it's a stunt. You know he's strapped to the plane. You know it's there's no real sort of threat to him, but there's still the look of it, which it can't fool the human eye, and more importantly, the human eye can't say, well, I know that's fake. It's all happening, and it looks great. Yes, it becomes an important part of the marketing, but we should point out, and I don't think it's a spoiler to say, that the scene that we're talking about, hanging from the side of the Airbus, that is central to the trailer, is over in about the first 5 minutes of the new film. There's a whole lot more after that, and that's a big plus, I think.
And which was such a surprise too. I remember I was there and I was saying to myself, "Oh my God, he's doing it now! It's like happening right now! Like, you know, it's almost like it was the end of another film that wasn't shot, and it just happened to tag that on this movie." It's a great way to open. It really is a great way to open film. I tell you what. So Tom Cruise is now 53. He's already hinting at another Mission Impossible, and who can blame him? I mean, the last one, Ghost Protocol, I think, is his highest grossing film throughout his career. This one, I'm sure, is going to make a bucket load, so I'm sure there's going to be another one in a year or two. He's talking about a sequel to Edge of Tomorrow. Surprisingly, he's talking about a sequel to Top Gun, which is a real surprise as well. But so, considering the real physical approach that he takes to his action roles, how much longer do you think he can last in this kind of action mode that he's in?
It's a good question, because I think that there's probably another Mission Impossible in him. I know he's going to shoot it very quickly. I know as we record this, Rogue Nation has opened to some really big figures in the US, so there's still a demand for him in this role. So that will happen. How well his body and the audience continues to accept a man nearing his mid-50s as an action hero shouldn't be a problem, but it will be. Edge of Tomorrow, I think he played a very sort of dark character in that one, and I think that lends itself to... It's going to be hard to picture him doing some of those big sort of war scenes again, but those weren't inherent to the story. They were sort of right at the start of the film again. Yeah. Top Gun's a different thing altogether. I was fortunate enough to see an IMAX screening of Top Gun when it had its Blu-ray release last year, and the distributor put on a couple of screenings at IMAX. And watching it again, you realise it's not really an action film. It is more a romance. There's not a whole lot of action in it. He's not called on to do too many action hero things, so I can certainly see him recreating the Maverick character, an older, jaded Maverick character in a sequel to that film. I think he's probably got another couple of big action movies in him that'll take him to his mid to late 50s. I'm 48. I'd like to think I could pull off a couple of these action films. So I'm hopeful. Yeah,
look, I think the guy's just incredible, though. You were talking before about him aging gracefully. I mean, it seems to me whenever I see him, like he had that lip sync battle with Jimmy Fallon. When was that? Like early this week, late last week?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
He looked younger than Jimmy Fallon.
Yeah, it's interesting because he spends a big chunk of Rogue Nation, certainly in the first third of the film, or a major sequence in the film, with his shirt off, getting to do his famous Tom Cruise run, which is an important part of any Mission Impossible film, is the big stunt.
Yeah.
But you're right, he still looks lean, he still looks fit. He's always been, by all accounts, a very sports-oriented, very physical actor, always getting in shape, whatever shape that might be for his role. He's a very technical actor in that regard. He respects the craft and he respects his body to do what it has to do to get these roles, make these roles as real as possible. And you're right, he looks good on telly. He was on the Jon Stewart show the other night, and he was every bit as, I think he's got a couple of years on Stewart, if I remember correctly, and he looks good.
Yeah, and much to Jon Stewart's chagrin, I think.
I think so, yes. But it soon we'll start asking questions about has any work been done, and how much of what we see on the screen has been touched up or tainted or tinted or whatever, just to make him look that little bit younger. But I mean, that's sort of Hollywood. If we can keep the Cruise brand strong for another couple of action movies with a few CGI touch-ups, that's probably not too bad a thing.
Well, I'll tell you what, if work has been done, it's probably the best work I've ever seen done on anyone, especially considering some of the botch jobs that are out there walking red carpets.
True.
So, we've talked about Tom Cruise, the physical actor, the action actor. There's also Tom Cruise, the dramatic actor. I miss Tom Cruise, I'm talking about Born on the 4th of July, Jerry Maguire, Rain Man, Magnolia. Yep. Why do you think he has stopped taking on dramatic roles?
Yeah, it's hard. He was destined for big things after Jerry Maguire. Prior to that, he carried films like A Few Good Men and The Firm, which were real movie star roles. And you didn't have to go too deep. My favourite, probably arguably still my favourite dramatic performance by him is Born on the 4th of July.
Yeah, me too.
And we'll probably get to that a little bit later in our chat. But I don't think studios are bankrolling big movie star dramas too much anymore. You look at things like Lines for Lambs and Eyes Wide Shut, and even Collateral to a certain extent, would find it hard to get the sort of studio backing needed to get a player like Tom Cruise involved.
Yeah.
So I just don't think those sort of movies are being made by people who pay for someone like Cruise. The other thing is, he took Eyes Wide after Jerry Maguire. He took Eyes Wide Shut. Literally disappeared from our screens for 4 years. So the number of roles that he could have had and potentially could have shown us after that Jerry Maguire period when he was in lockdown with Stanley Kubrick on Eyes Wide Shut probably robbed us of a few great roles that could have sent Tom Cruise off in a whole other direction.
Yep.
In fact, there's some talk that after Eyes Wide Shut and that smaller wonderful role in Magnolia, Mission Impossible 2 was rushed into production because his movie star, his A-list action hero blockbuster name was on the fade quickly. So, But if you take Mission Impossible 2 out of that equation, the run is Eyes Wide Shut, Magnolia, Vanilla Sky, and Minority Report. Now, they're all pretty dark, challenging roles for the actor and for the studio. So that man is still there.
Yeah, and looking at his filmography now after Minority Report, the last Samurai and Collateral. So really good run of roles there. But it just seems to me the one thing missing from the Tom Cruise story is the Oscar. And I personally, I'm one of the very, very few that personally believe that in the year that he did Born on the 4th of July, I'd rather that performance over what Daniel Day-Lewis, although magnificent in My Left Foot, I'd rather have given it to Tom Cruise for the role that he did in Born on the 4th of July, because I just absolutely loved that performance and I love that movie as well.
So do I. There's a particular scene in Born on the 4th of July when his father brings him home and throws him on the bed, and Cruise starts saying, "Who's going to love me? Going to love me?"
Yeah.
And I remember watching that scene and just getting choked up, and even feeling a bit too simply now when I recite those words. And I came out of that screening and I thought he's going to win. This will be the year that he wins. 3 weeks later, I went to a preview screening of My Left Foot. I thought, no, it's not going to happen this year. They're going to give it to Day-Lewis just because of the lengths he went to, and it was an extraordinary performance. But I think Cruise has been a bit unlucky. I think he was very unlucky he didn't get the supporting actor for Magnolia when it went to, I think, Michael Caine for Cider House Rules. I think that was probably the biggest jip of his career.
Yeah.
And I think of all the acting performances that were nominated the year that Jerry Maguire came out, his is probably the one that holds up most of all. But he didn't win it for that. I think it's probably in the future. I'm really fascinated to see where he goes as an older man, where his acting career takes him.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. I mean, it's interesting looking back in his career to just... You mentioned it previously, like you touched on before, the roster of great directors that this man has worked with. I mean, it's quite incredible. You're talking about Spielberg, Scorsese, Kubrick, Francis Ford Coppola in The Outsiders, Oliver Stone, Michael Mann, Ridley Scott. Even though it was in Legends, but he was working Ridley Scott. I mean, the list of the names, it goes even beyond that. Barry Levinson and so on and so forth. I mean, what director that's out there today would you really like Tom Cruise? You think would really suit that Tom Cruise?
Oh, look, it's always been such a huge part of his career that he chooses a good director. Ever since, he had Scorsese with Colour of Money. He even had Ridley Scott as far back as Legend, and then just the list goes on. He works with the hottest directors, and I think that's been key to his success. At the moment, I think probably the director working in Hollywood at the moment that could really capture the scale of movie stardom that Cruise represents is Christopher Nolan.
Yep.
I think it would have been great to have seen Cruise in the Matthew McConaughey part in Interstellar. I think that that Nolan has this sense of scale and a sense of emotional intricacy in his best work that Cruise could really get hold of. But then on the other side of things, I'd like to see a more human Cruise. I'd love to see him return to a smaller, dramatic role that maybe someone like Richard Linklater could write for him and work.
Yeah.
I think he could be there could be an intrinsically American character in Tom Cruise that we haven't seen yet, and someone like Linklater could bring that out.
Yeah, definitely. There's two choices I love to see Tom Cruise work with. One, kind of obvious, the other not so. The first one will be Quentin Tarantino. I like to see what Tom Cruise would do with a Tarantino script, especially if it's in a supporting kind of role. It seems like that with Tarantino's films, the best roles in his films are those supporting roles, the Christoph Waltz role or the Samuel Jackson role, kind of something like that. I reckon would be fun. Another director who I think would bring out the real best kind of dramatic work that Cruise could probably muster would be Jean-Marc Vallée. The director, he did Wild, he did Dallas Buyers Club. He seems to have a really good repertoire. He works with superstar actors, and he gets them to do their best performances. I mean, Reese Witherspoon in Wild, that was kind of a real kind of 180 for her in regards to her dramatic work. McConaughey the same. That was the end of that McConaissance, but he was the right director for that movie to do that film. And look at what happened at the end there, an Oscar. So I think someone like Jean-Marc Vallée, I don't know if he would be say a marketable name to work with Cruise, even though he's worked with a bunch of people regardless, but I think he would be a really, really excellent choice of director for Cruise to work with on a really kind of meaty, full of depth kind of dramatic role.
Yeah, look, I'd love to see Cruise just go and lock himself away with someone like David Cronenberg or even Xavier Dolan for a year and just come out with something we don't expect and craft an entirely different kind of Tom Cruise character like the which we haven't seen before. So, like I say, I think the next 20 years in Cruise's career will be really fascinating and really interesting. How the biggest marquee movie name of our generation transforms into an elder statesman in Hollywood.
Yeah, I like to see that too. I don't know, for some reason I'm thinking Paul Newman, in regards, I know that Tom Cruise and Paul Newman were very close. I just see Tom Cruise turn into kind of a Paul Newman type of actor when he gets older. Just taking on those kind of roles. I mean, the Top Gun, to talk about the Top Gun sequel where he comes back as an older, more jaded kind of maverick, kind of reminds me of The Colour of Money, where Paul Newman came back as an older, more jaded, Fast Eddie. And he got an Oscar for that as well. Paul Newman did. So it'll be interesting to see how. You're right. The next 20 years is going to be very interesting to see how he goes about choosing these projects and what type of projects he goes for. Since we are talking Tom Cruise, of course, there is that other element of Tom Cruise, and when we talk about releases of this year, the other high-profile release that came out that kind of featured Cruise was, of course, the Alex Gibney documentary expose on Scientology, which was called Going Clear. I mean, that was a documentary had many damning accusations against Scientology, and of course, we all know that Tom Cruise is a high-profile member. Interestingly, like, Cruise has not answered any questions about Going Clear since seemingly no one has asked during this last run of press for Mission Impossible. And what I really find interesting is that he's gone through like a few press tumbles, especially after War of the Worlds came out, and there was like the whole thing with Matt Lauer and Oprah and what have you. So he has come back from, you know, some controversial moments in his career where it looked like, you know, well, this could be what derails Tom Cruise, but look at him now, just as big as he's ever been. Is he like practically bulletproof from this line of attack when it comes to his own personal and religious beliefs?
I don't think he's bulletproof. I think along the way the image has been tarnished. Probably more than any other actor of our generation, he had the furthest to fall. So when the internet journalism started to boom, he was right at the forefront. He had he was in the crosshairs for anything that could happen. Didn't help himself with the Oprah incident. Didn't help himself with the Mind Your Manners, Peter 60 Minutes moment as well. But by the same token, he was still discovering, Hollywood was still discovering how to manage themselves in the face of this new internet era of you know, intense scrutiny. So he's not bulletproof. He has bounced back. It's probably why we've seen him in so many very marketable action films, and it also points to why. It also points to him being such a micromanaged brand in Hollywood. Hollywood has so much invested in the brand Tom Cruise that there's armies of people that are not going to let him fall from that perch, that are going to deny Hollywood those sort of potential dollars. So, and I think he realises that, and quote unquote his people realise that. So the machinations that go on behind the scenes with the Cruise brand must be fascinating. It's going to make for a wonderful expose one day. With regard to Alex Gibney's documentary and the book upon which it was based that I read, I tend to try not to let my feelings about a movie star, any movie star, be influenced by their private life. If that was the case, there are so many nutty ones amongst them, we'd probably never go to the movies again. So I tend to let what's up on the screen speak and ignore all the other white noise, which isn't easy in this landscape in which we exist. And I spent a lot of time defending Cruise against sort of the Scientology talk on those grounds. So that's probably as best a way as I can sum it up.
It is really interesting when you're talking about regards to the internet and Tom Cruise, how one kind of affects the other. Because when the Oprah incident, the whole couch jumping incident happened, that's when YouTube first started. I think was first revealed, first came out, and so I think that was I remember reading like that couch jumping thing was the first viral video. I mean, that spread like wildfire, and it was memes and what have you, so many things after that. So yeah, I mean, he's an interesting personality in that it does seem like very much micromanaged, very protective of his image, and there is that kind of thing there that you were talking about before in regards to we don't really seem like we know who the real Tom Cruise is. But as far as I'm concerned, the Tom Cruise that I'm really interested in is Tom Cruise, the movie star. You know?
Yeah. Look, he's as off screen. He's still this huge enigma. Nobody really knows what to believe. The stories that have emerged about his marriage with Nicole and his marriage with Katie and his life with his children and so on and so forth, and his role in the quote-unquote church. But all of this is still hearsay, third party, however reliable or potentially reliable or seemingly real that is. He's never come out and spoken at great length or in great detail about that, and so it will always remain very enigmatic, very sort of in the distance. And sure, there are people who've turned off his movies, and there's been a section of the media that have gone after him and the celebrities that are involved for those reasons. But
yeah,
when they came out and they were ready to say his stardom is over because Edge of Tomorrow opened softly, what people don't realise is that Edge of Tomorrow went on to be his biggest success outside of the Mission Impossible franchise. That's not reported.
Yeah.
So he's still carrying it. Sure, they throw up things like Rock of Ages or certain misfires like that, but every actor's got them. I go back to the great days of Hollywood. We remember Casablanca and we remember It's a Wonderful Life. We don't remember the B movies that Jimmy Stewart or Humphrey Bogart put out in that period as well. So in time, we probably won't remember Night and Day. We may not remember Lions for Lambs or Valkyrie maybe, because they're not his best films. But there's plenty of other good ones out there to remember Tom Cruise by.
Definitely true. And speaking of that, Tom Cruise has had a spectacular career. How about we take some time now, just have to list our top 3 favourite Tom Cruise moments. I have you go first.
All right. Now, I think I've got a few years on you, so I'm going to recall the impact that Risky Business made when it first came out.
I love Risky Business. I remember watching that when I was a kid. I always loved that film.
Yeah, look, it was in the midst of, and it wasn't a big hit when it first came out, but in the midst of a Hollywood that was representing teenagers as people in porkies or stuff like that, along came this really slick, very mature, very dark look at teenage sexuality, wrapped up as a teen comedy, with some very adult sex scenes in it, some very sort of coarse moments in terms of Joey Pant's character, Joe Pantoliano, and just a steaming chemistry between Rebecca De Mornay and Cruise. So my first Tom Cruise moment would have to be the announcement that Tom Cruise here, and that was Risky Business.
Yeah. Well, my first would be from the same decade, a movie that came out a few years after that, and that's Born on the 4th of July, and I know that's a film that you love as well. And the thing that I loved about that movie was that it seemed like a film that he was kind of building up to. You had Risky Business after that, Top Gun, and after that, Rain Man. He's kind of like he went deep up against Dustin Hoffman in this really dramatic role, and then came his turn to kind of play that kind of character. And that part of Ron Kovic, it's interesting reading about the other actors who was actually interested in doing that film first. I remember reading that Pacino was going to do it, and then I remember reading that Travolta was going to do it, and then Tom Cruise took it on. And then when he took it on, I mean, just like he takes on his stunts, he took on this performance. It was just like a marvelous thing to watch, and it still is. And it's still a film that affects me. I still see it as one of Oliver Stone's best movies. And the scene that you were mentioning before about when his father brings him home, I think it might be the same scene. It might be another scene when Cruise is yelling about how they killed babies in the war and all these things, and he's saying to his mother, God wasn't there, all that kind of stuff. That scene, especially in that movie, that's when, to me, we finally saw. I mean, Top Gun gave us Tom Cruise, the movie star, but that scene in that movie gave us Tom Cruise, the actor. And
I think you're right.
Yeah,
I think that he was coming off a series of huge hits. Where he and the word was starting to get around. Well, these are all fine films, but he's starting to play the same character. He's the cocky, brash young man who falls from grace and then finds some sort of redemption and becomes a better man because of it. As good as All the Right Moves and Legend and Top Gun and Colour of Money and Cocktail are, and Rain Man to a certain extent, there was a point where they said, "All right, Mr. Cruise, we know you can do this and do it really well. What's next?" And then he hit with Born on the 4th of July, and I can remember the impact it made with audiences and with critics and with the Academy at the time, and they knew that this guy was more than just Ray-Bans and a cocky smile. He was a great actor.
Yeah. What would be your second choice?
Well, I'm going to go for sort of a similar sort of thing. There's a period where he started to emerge out of that sex symbol, image of the 80s kind of guy with Top Gun. with Colour of Money to a certain extent, definitely with Cocktail, which was, arguably his most derided film, but one of his biggest hits.
Yeah.
I'm going to put the Rain Man, Born on the 4th of July, and a few years after that, probably A Few Good Men, as that period where we thought, all right, he's melding that I'm an actor, I'm also a huge movie star, I can do both, and I'm going to be around for a long time. So that period around the late 80s and early 90s when the stardom was solidified, but also the acting prowess came through. So Rain Man and 4th of July was a big moment for me.
My second one will be a choice where it really showed kind of how ballsy Tom Cruise is sometimes when he takes on certain roles, and that's Interview with a Vampire. Now, it's what I loved about that film when I first saw it is that it was so opposite of everything he did before. He did dabble. He did have the Irish accent in Far and Away, which all things being said, is not that bad of a film. I watched it recently. I bought a Blu-ray of it. But Interview with a Vampire is more of an English accent. He really lost quite a bit of weight. It looked like for that role. A lot of that, of course, is makeup effects as well. But just him playing a villain and ferocity that he brought to that villainous character, I just really loved that. And I also saw that film as something. It's to me that film seems something of a almost of a passing of the torch from Tom Cruise to Brad Pitt, because Brad Pitt was kind of like just coming into his own around that time, and was Brad Pitt was almost like pegged to become the next Tom Cruise if he could. But we all know now there's only one Tom Cruise, and that is that. But Interview with the Vampire, that's a film that to me, not only do I think it's one of his better performances, but I think it's also one of his riskiest, which depending who you ask, did or didn't pay off, but I think it did.
I'm going to go for my third one. I'm chopping and changing a bit here. I had Jerry Maguire written down, but I've mentioned that. And I've also mentioned I love that period when he went to the darker, stranger stuff like Vanilla Sky and Magnolia and Eyes Wide Shut. But I'm going to have to put in there the impact that Minority Report had on me, the time when Spielberg and Cruise came together for a Philip K. Dick novel, and brought with it this real sort of classic film noir type detective story in a science fiction setting. I absolutely adore Minority Report. I think I rated it as my favourite film of that year, and I thought it was a strong, mature performance by Cruise in a pretty extraordinary film. So I'm going to go with Minority Report. Probably most notably the scene in Minority Report where Samantha Morton, I think, is recalling how Tom Cruise's missing son would have grown up, and Catherine Morris is in the background as his ex-wife, his separated wife, and Cruise is looking into her eyes as she's telling him what became of his boy, what would have become of his boy. It's some of his best work in a film that didn't need those sort of heavy dramatics, but was all the more better because of it.
Yeah, I definitely had great film, great choice, great combination of director and star as well. I mean, is there any more director and star that are more suited to each other than Spielberg and Cruise? I can't think of it. Really works well. Well, my third one, I was going to go Jerry Maguire as well, but a lot of people know about Jerry Maguire. I'm going to go with Tropic Thunder. Because once again, it's Tom Cruise just going out there. Before that was Lions for Lambs as a dramatic role, and then after Tropic Thunder, he'll go back to the action stuff. But what I loved about that film, it just showed how funny he could be. And in his movies, like once in a while, he'll do some stuff that it will show his sense of humor. And for a man who many people don't really see as having a bit of a personality, or that can have fun, or can be funny on screen in a broad comedic role, I thought that how he played Les Grossman in Tropic Thunder was just terrific. And look, I know Robert Downey Jr. got a lot of pundits for that movie with his role. Excuse me. But Tom Cruise, every single time Tom Cruise got on that screen, I laughed my ass off.
I agree. Look, I thought it was a very funny role. It does raise the question. In all his filmography, he doesn't have an out-and-out comedy. Probably to a certain extent, Night and Day was the romantic comedy, action comedy, you might say.
Yeah.
But even then, it was falling back on his action man trope and his action man personality. He hasn't been an out-and-out laugh out loud film, and I guess also Rock of Ages, which we've mentioned, had a few. He was going for laughs with that role, but it was certainly more the musical. So I'd like to see him try to. I don't know. Could he really pull off a romantic comedy? Would audiences buy him in that sort of mode? And who would you cast opposite?
Well, it's an interesting question. I'm not really sure. I mean, Jerry Maguire was the closest thing to a romantic comedy in there, but there's so many other elements going on in Jerry Maguire that kind of doesn't count.
Exactly, yeah.
It's an interesting choice. I think it could, but it has to be with an actress that's of the same age and the same status as him. I can't see...
It's funny, because you look at the casting, the best sort of female roles against Tom Cruise, they haven't been romantic roles. You think of Demi Moore in A Few Good Men.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think across the board. It's strange. There's Leah Thompson in All the Right Moves. They've been hard to define chemistry often with his leading ladies, and I guess that can be even with Cameron Diaz in Night and Day it had its detractors as well. So look, I'm keen to see where he goes down that path, if he goes down that path.
Yeah, I'm keen to see that too. I remember there were rumours about that he and Ben Stiller were going to do some comedy together. Like, they're going to be the Hardy Boys all grown up, and like Tom Cruise is going to play one, the really kind of dashing one, and Ben Stiller's going to be the goofball kind of thing. Because I never really. I think there was some rumblings that's going to happen, but I think that was around the time that War of the Worlds came out, and the whole Tom Cruise is kind of like took a hit in regards to his popularity and all that. So that was kind of shelved for like more kind of conventional fare. But I mean, I think to use an old cliche, the sky's the limit when it comes to what Tom Cruise could do. Number one, mainly being because he's Tom Cruise, and number two, because let's face it, he's a talented actor and he's skilled enough to go through different down different avenues and try different things.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's interesting when you look back to those the very earliest film roles, the movies that made him a star. There's a great, well-documented reports of when they were casting Taps back in the early 80s, 80 and 81. The whole cast was saying, although Cruise was only in a supporting part, the whole cast was saying, wait till you get a load of this guy. This guy's going to be big. People like Sean Penn and Timothy Hutton, who already had a lot of acclaim to their name, they were saying this kid's going to emerge and be the biggest star of his generation, and it all came true. So
very much so.
Yeah.
And it pretty much does seem like the last man standing in that generation too. Outside of Sean Penn, I can't think of anyone else really that's out there. Val Kilmer's going off somewhere too. I think he's in Montana or something, running for mayor, and I don't know what else anyone else is doing. But look, it's going to be really interesting to see what Tom Cruise does. For now, we got Rogue Nation to go by, and you and I both agree it's a terrific movie. And Simon Foster, I thank you very much for joining me tonight. And where can people find you on the web?
Go to Screenspace with a hyphen, of course. We're about to do a big relaunch of the site, so look out for that one. You can always check it out on Facebook and on Twitter as well. Talk to me on Twitter at SimonRFoster1. And listen to me on the radio, good old-fashioned radio, ABC FM statewide. Every Friday afternoon, just after 4, I review the latest releases. Always good to talk to you, Matt. Thank you.
Always good to talk to you, Simon. Thank you very much.